Hello, this is lesson 11.1. We begin with chapter 11 in this course. And this lesson, this first one, is called Prelude to Disaster. How did climate change shape the late Middle Ages? So this will be our first lesson, and it's the first lesson in the summer reading. And it gives you an idea of what subsequent lessons will be like. This is a rather short one. Some of those lessons are longer, some are shorter. And this is where we begin. The place is Europe. That sounds appropriate for the course. And the time frame is about 1300 to about 1330. Key people of the Prelude to Disaster. A lot of times I'll put key people up here. And we've got Edward II. He's the only one this time. Key concepts of the Prelude to Disaster. We've got the Great Famine, and we also have the Little Ice Age. Intro. Did you know that Europe actually experienced a little ice age from about 1300 to about 1450? And in fact, some scientists say it lasted until as late as the 1850s. It completely shut down the Viking expansion toward the west, and it completely changed Europe's history. Climate change and famine. From the Crusades up to about 1300, there was relative stability in Europe. This period is known to us today as the High Middle Ages. And it was a time of great economic expansion due to developments in industry and banking. Towns and cities were growing. There was a politically stable feudal system in place. The church was a powerful and well-respected institution. The population of Europe was at its highest level, and that was the problem, as it turned out. Farming practices were extremely primitive and inefficient compared to what they would be just a few centuries later, as we shall see. All the best farmland was being used to feed people. And increasingly, farmers were turning to what we call marginal lands to keep up with the demands for food. Marginal lands are lands that are rocky, swampy, sandy, hilly, remote, etc. And such lands are the most susceptible to bad weather and climate changes. Many people depended on these marginal lands for their food. The entire economic system of Europe was extremely fragile. Even the smallest disruption, like an ice age for instance, could cause the deaths of millions of people by starvation. Starting around 1300, the climate in Europe became colder and wetter. And this caused torrential rains. These rains ruined crops for people and animals. And it began to happen year after year. Eventually, you had the Great Famine of 1315 to 1322. Perhaps 10 to 15% of the population died. Transportation at this time was slow and expensive, which meant relief efforts were unlikely. Food prices for foods such as grain, dairy, and meat rose sharply. People ate through village reserves fairly quickly, and when the reserve supplies were gone, people often had to eat the seed that they were supposed to plant for the next season, and this made the crisis even worse for next year. Reduced diet resulted in several problems. People have more vulnerability to disease, they have less energy to do work, and now you have a vicious cycle of less production and higher prices. The social consequences of climate change and the Great Famine. There was a huge, wider economic turndown as a result of all this. For example, if shepherds can't feed their sheep, there's no wool for people to use to make clothes, and the people who make clothes are now out of a job also. Unemployment increased. Crime increased. People often sold everything and borrowed from moneylenders to buy food. The population declined rapidly due to starvation, due to disease, and due to delayed marriage. If you delay marriage, you have fewer years to have children. So whom do you blame for this disaster? There's a whole list. For example, how about rich speculators who jacked up food prices? They did this by buying up entire supplies of grain, and then they would refuse to sell any of it until people were absolutely desperate and would pay any price. How about the Jews? We're going to see anti-Semitism throughout our course. Many Jews were engaged in money lending. Christian authorities often restricted them from doing much else. They were often accused of many things. For example, plots to annihilate all Christians, using lepers as their minions and agents, poisoning wells. And many Jews and lepers were killed, tortured, beaten, and even fined. Where's the government in all of this? For example, what could the king do about all this? As king, you had a list of things that you could try. You could publicly condemn the speculators. You could put price controls on the food. You could make it a law that grain, meat, etc. could not be sold for more than a certain price. That way speculators couldn't make a profit from holding on to it. You could forbid the export of food out of the country, and you could import more food from abroad. King Edward II of England, who died in 1327, tried all of these measures. None of them was effective.